August 23, 1982. An 11-year-old boy named Ricky Stetson laced up his running shoes in Portland, Maine, ready for an evening jog along the Black Cove Trail. It was 8:00 p.m. on a warm summer night. His parents watched him disappear into the gathering dusk. It was the last time they'd ever see their son alive. The next morning, a motorist spotted something horrific along Interstate 295. Ricky's small body lay crumpled on the side of the highway. When investigators arrived, what they found made their blood run cold. The boy had been strangled. There were ligature marks around his neck. Multiple stab wounds covered his body. But the most disturbing detail was the bite marks scattered across his skin. Bite marks that had been deliberately slashed with a knife. Forensic dentists had never seen anything like it. This person knew bite marks could identify him, so he'd cut away the flesh with a blade. This wasn't some panicked criminal. This was someone who understood how investigations worked. Someone methodical. Someone who would absolutely do this again. Here's where this story gets even more disturbing. 2 years before Ricky Stetson was ended, Portland had been terrorized by someone they called the Oakdale Slasher. This phantom attacker stalked children in wooded areas, slashing them with a knife before disappearing. 9-year-old Michael Witham had barely survived an encounter with this person. The boy's throat had been cut, missing his carotid artery by just inches. If the blade had gone any deeper, Michael would have been gone. Witnesses described the Oakdale Slasher as a white male in his late teens or early 20s, eerily similar to descriptions of a young man on a bicycle who'd been seen following Ricky Stetson right before he vanished. Police focused their investigation on a local suspect named Joseph Anderson, who fit the profile perfectly. They were closing in on him, building their case, when something happened that shattered everything they thought they knew. Over 1,000 miles away in Bellevue, Nebraska, another child had been taken and ended with identical wounds and markings. If the Nebraska case was connected to the Maine cases, then Anderson wasn't their guy. They weren't dealing with a local predator. They were hunting a serial offender who was targeting children across state lines. Think about that for a second. Somewhere out there, someone was moving from state to state, perfecting his technique, leaving destroyed families in his wake. Fall 1983, Bellevue, Nebraska. 13-year-old Danny Joe Eberly loved his paper route and was obsessed with his bicycle. Every penny he earned went toward keeping that bike perfect. Sunday morning, September 18, 1983. Danny left at 6:00 a.m. to deliver 70 newspapers. His brother, who also had a paper route, remembered something unsettling. On previous days, he'd noticed a white man in a tan car following him slowly. That morning, Danny delivered exactly 3 of his 70 newspapers. At the 4th delivery address, his bicycle was discovered with the rest of the newspapers still stacked there. But Danny was gone. No sign of a struggle. The boy had vanished. For 3 agonizing days, search teams combed the area. Then Danny's body was found in high grass alongside a gravel road, 4 miles from his abandoned bicycle. He'd been stripped to his undershorts. His hands and feet were bound with rope, his mouth sealed with surgical tape. Knife wounds suggested torture before being ended. He'd been stabbed 9 times. A star-shaped pattern was carved into his chest. Just like Ricky Stetson in Maine, there were bite marks that had been deliberately cut away with a knife. Because Danny had been taken across county lines, the FBI got involved. Special Agent Robert Ressler, one of the pioneers of criminal profiling who'd later inspire Mindhunter, studied the crime scene. He recognized the signature, a compulsive biter who understood forensic techniques. someone who read police magazines and was learning to perfect his methods. The body's location told Ressler this person might be physically weak or panicked, and was possibly operating in new territory. Investigators focused on crucial evidence, the rope binding Danny. It looked ordinary, common white nylon. But forensic experts discovered something extraordinary inside. Hidden in the core were 24 different fiber types and 106 different colored yarns. The National Cordage Institute had never seen anything like it. If they found another piece with the same composition, it would be like finding a smoking gun. Parents clutched their children closer. Nobody walked anywhere alone. And then it happened again, December 2nd, 1983. 12-year-old Christopher Walden was walking to school in Papillion, Nebraska, just 3 miles from where Danny Eberle's body had been found. It was the first day his mother had allowed him to walk to school alone since Danny's ending. She'd been terrified to let him go, but Christopher had begged. He was old enough to walk to school by himself, he'd argued. He'd be careful. He promised. Witnesses saw a man in a tan car approach the boy at a 4-way stop. Christopher was forced into the vehicle in broad daylight. For 2 days, search teams scoured the frozen landscape in sub-zero Nebraska winter temperatures. Then pheasant hunters stumbled upon a snow-covered figure in the woods. Christopher's frozen body bore the same signature. Multiple stab wounds, the star-shaped carving. His throat had been cut so deeply that he was nearly decapitated. But there was something different about this scene. Christopher hadn't been bound like Danny. His body had been better concealed, and investigators believed he'd been ended immediately after being taken, not tortured first. 2 sets of footprints led into the woods where Christopher's body lay. But only 1 set of footprints led back out. The person worked alone, selecting his victims methodically, disposing of them in the same remote area. The community was in absolute panic. Parents refused to let their children out of their sight. Schools were on lockdown. Everyone knew they had a serial predator on their hands, someone who was hunting children like animals. FBI agent Robert Ressler carefully refined his behavioral profile of the person they were hunting. The person's clear attraction to young males and his sophisticated knowledge of forensic techniques suggested someone deeply involved with youth activities. Maybe a coach who spent time with boys' sports teams. Maybe a teacher who had access to children daily. Maybe a scout leader who went on camping trips with vulnerable kids. His understanding of bite mark analysis and how investigations worked indicated he read police magazines voraciously, studied law enforcement techniques, and was actively learning from past cases to avoid detection. A breakthrough came from an unexpected source that would prove crucial to cracking the case. A woman who regularly walked her dog in the area had witnessed Christopher Walden's abduction at that 4-way stop in broad daylight. But the sheer trauma of what she'd seen, a child being forced into a car, had caused her mind to block out crucial details as a protective mechanism. Investigators arranged for her to undergo hypnosis sessions to try to recover those suppressed memories buried in her subconscious. Under hypnosis, she recalled something vitally important: a brown car with a license plate that began with the letter R. And she remembered the driver was roughly the same height as his young victim. This was a significant detail. It meant they weren't looking for some imposing, physically intimidating figure. The person was average-sized, maybe even small for an adult male. He was using weapons and intimidation to control victims who were physically weaker, not relying on superior strength. Sarpy County Sheriff Patrick Thomas made a bold and risky move. During a televised news conference, he addressed the person directly. He called him a spineless coward and urged him to surrender. It was psychological warfare, designed to provoke a mistake from someone they knew would be watching every news broadcast, monitoring their every move, probably enjoying the fear he'd created. The strategy worked in ways nobody could have predicted. Barbara Weaver was a daycare worker in Bellevue. She'd been praying daily for this person's capture. On January 11, 1984, she noticed a suspicious car in her parking lot. The driver wore a ski cap and looked eerily similar to the composite sketch she'd seen on television. Something about him made her deeply uneasy. As she watched, the man got out of the car and started walking toward her classroom. Barbara quickly wrote down the license plate number, her hands shaking. Then the man approached her classroom door, pulled out a knife, and threatened to end her life right there. Barbara screamed and fled to safety, locking the door behind her. But she still had that license plate number clutched in her hand. That license plate led police straight to Offutt Air Force Base and a 19-year-old radar maintenance mechanic named John Joseph Zuber IV. When investigators first learned who the license plate belonged to, they couldn't believe it. John Zuber seemed to embody everything wholesome about American youth. He was an Eagle Scout, the highest rank you can achieve in Boy Scouts, earned by less than 4% of all scouts. He was an assistant scout leader, mentoring younger boys. He had an IQ of 123. He was an honor student who played clarinet in his high school marching band and ran track. He served in the United States Air Force, maintaining sophisticated radar equipment. This was the last person anyone would suspect of such horrific crimes. But that's exactly what made him so dangerous. When police searched Zuber's car, they found a hair that was microscopically identical to Danny Joe Eberle's. They found a knife. They found tape. And they found a piece of rope. When forensic experts analyzed that rope, they discovered it contained the exact same impossible combination of 106 different fibers found at the Nebraska crime scenes. When asked about it, Zuber claimed he'd received the rope years earlier in Boy Scouts and had no idea it was unique. In his footlocker, investigators found detective magazines and disturbing materials. Everything pointed to someone who'd been studying how to commit the perfect crime. Confronted with overwhelming evidence, Zuber's carefully constructed facade crumbled. He confessed not only to ending Danny Joe Eberle and Christopher Walden in Nebraska, but also to being the Oakdale slasher who'd terrorized Portland, Maine, years earlier. Those practice attacks on children like Michael Witham? Those had been rehearsals. He'd been working up the courage, perfecting his technique, learning how much force it took to control a struggling child. The details he provided were absolutely chilling in their coldness. After ending Danny Joe Eberle on that Sunday morning, Zuber calmly walked into a McDonald's restaurant, washed the blood from his hands in the bathroom sink, and ordered breakfast. Just another customer starting his day. No visible signs of distress. No hint that he'd just committed an unspeakable act against a child. Following Christopher Walden's ending in December, Zuber did something even more disturbing. He attended a Boy Scout meeting where he counseled frightened children about stranger danger and how to stay safe from predators. He stood there in his scout leader uniform, offering advice and comfort to terrified kids, all while hiding his role as the very predator everyone feared. The hypocrisy was stunning. When investigators asked Zuber the crucial question, if he would do it again if released, his response sent chills through everyone in the room. After long consideration, he delivered a disturbing admission that revealed the terrifying truth about who he really was. The urges that drove him to end children's lives were stronger than any moral restraint or fear of consequences. He couldn't control it. He admitted with disturbing clarity that he would absolutely do it again. He wasn't reformed. He wasn't sorry in any meaningful way. He was simply caught, So how does an Eagle Scout become a serial predator? The answer lies in Zuber's childhood, though understanding it doesn't excuse what he became. John Joseph Zuber IV was born on July 2, 1963, in Lawrence, Massachusetts. When he was just 6 years old, he witnessed something deeply traumatic that would haunt him for the rest of his life. His father attempting to strangle his mother during a violent domestic dispute. His mother survived and filed for divorce. She moved John and his sister Jane to Portland, Maine, cutting all contact with their father. Despite John's desperate pleas to see his dad, he was never allowed contact again. His mother was described by those who knew the family as cold, controlling, and emotionally manipulative. John lived under what his high school band teacher, Rich Petre, called a very, very tight leash. The teacher observed that the mother was extremely controlling in ways that seemed to stifle John's development. At school, John became a target for bullies who sensed his vulnerability. He was the shy, meek kid who never defended himself, never fought back, never stood up for himself. Some teachers wondered if John believed he deserved the abuse, the shoving, the name-calling, the constant harassment that made school a daily torture. His Spanish teacher, Francesca Bergan, described him as a little boy all through his high school years, noting that while many kids get picked on, they usually defend themselves somehow. John never did. To compensate for his overwhelming feelings of isolation and powerlessness, John threw himself into various activities. He joined Cub Scouts and eventually became an Eagle Scout. He played clarinet in the marching band. He ran track. Despite all this involvement, he remained an outsider looking in, never quite connecting with his peers in meaningful ways. But inside, something dark was growing and metastasizing. His fantasies progressed from imagining hurting people to actually acting on those violent urges. The powerlessness he felt in his daily life transformed into a need to exert absolute power and control over others. At age 13, John stabbed a young girl with a pencil and felt sexually aroused when she cried out in pain. The reaction shocked even him, but it also excited him in ways he couldn't ignore. The next day, armed with a razor blade, he slashed another girl as he rode past her on his bicycle. The attacks were quick, surgical, leaving his victims bleeding and traumatized while he escaped unidentified. He was never caught, never charged, never made to face consequences for his escalating violence. In another incident, he beat up a boy and nearly strangled him to unconsciousness. Having been bullied throughout his entire youth, Zuber finally experienced the intoxicating rush of physical and mental power over another person. He relished the dominance, the control, the ability to inflict fear. He was addicted to the feeling. From that point forward, he began casually contemplating stabbing or slashing strangers, playing out scenarios in his mind of how he would do it, how they would react, how it would feel. Zuber's confession revealed chilling details. He approached Danny Joe Eberly that Sunday morning, drew a knife, covered the boy's mouth, and forced him to his car. He drove to a remote gravel road and made Danny strip to his underwear. Danny begged for his life. A 13-year-old boy, bound and terrified, pleading to see his family again. Zuber stabbed him repeatedly while the boy begged. Then he drove to McDonald's for breakfast. With Christopher Walden, Zuber showed his knife and ordered him into the car. He drove to railway lines and ordered Christopher to strip. But Christopher refused to lie down in the snow and tried to run. Zuber overpowered him and began stabbing, cutting the boy's throat so deeply he nearly decapitated him. Zuber's confession about Ricky Stetson revealed similar patterns. He approached the boy on his bicycle while Ricky jogged, then strangled, stabbed, and bit him, before slashing the bite marks with his knife. On July 3, 1984, one day after his 21st birthday, John Zuber appeared in Sarpy County Courthouse and pleaded guilty to the first-degree endings of Danny Joe Eberly and Christopher Walden. His defense attorneys had told him the evidence was too overwhelming to mount any substantial defense. The prosecution wasn't offering any plea deals. His only option was to plead guilty and hope for mercy. He didn't get it. On October 9, 1984, a three-judge panel delivered their verdict, citing the circumstances as especially heinous, atrocious, and cruel, and finding exceptional depravity in Zuber's actions. They unanimously sentenced him to pass away in the electric chair. In 1989, Zuber was extradited to Maine to stand trial for Ricky Stetson's ending. Bite mark analysis definitively matched Zuber's teeth to the wounds on Ricky's body, even though Zuber had tried to destroy the evidence. He was convicted and sentenced to life in prison for that case. For 12 years, Zuber sat on Nebraska's death row. During that time, he wrote letters to journalist Mark Pettit, who was writing a book about the case. In those letters and in face-to-face interviews, Zuber revealed the disturbing fantasies that continued to consume him. He created drawings depicting himself torturing and ending children, drawings so sadistic that prison officials initially refused to release them to the public. July 17, 1996. At 12:10 a.m., a brown curtain separating the witness room from the execution chamber parted at the Nebraska State Penitentiary. John Zuber, now 33 years old, stood before the electric chair. "Inmate Zuber," the warden said, "do you wish to make a final statement?" Zuber stared into the witness room where some of the victims' family members watched. "I just want to say that again. I am sorry for what I have done," he said in a steady voice. "I do not know if my passing will change anything, or if it will bring anyone peace. And I just ask the families of Danny Eberly and Christopher Walden and Richard Stetson to please try to find some peace and ask the people of Nebraska to forgive me. That's all." The warden read the execution warrant. The curtain closed to conceal the identities of the execution team. When it opened again, Zuber had been strapped into the chair. A leather belt crossed his waist. 2 restraints pulled across his chest. 2 more across his legs. A metal cap was placed on his head. At 12:14 a.m., 2,450 volts of electricity surged through John Zuber's body. 2 more shocks followed. Smoke seeped from the hood covering his face. His fists clenched. At 12:22 a.m., he was pronounced gone. The execution left Zuber with a 4-inch blister on the top of his head and blistering on both sides of his head above his ears. This finding would later fuel arguments by death penalty opponents that the electric chair constituted cruel and unusual punishment. Nebraska eventually switched to lethal injection as its method of execution. John Zuber became only the 2nd person executed in Nebraska since the state reinstated the death penalty in 1973. The victims' families have carried unimaginable pain for over 40 years now. But they've worked to ensure Danny, Christopher, and Ricky are never forgotten. In April 2023, marking the 40th anniversary of the Nebraska cases, Sarpy County unveiled the Eberly-Walden Crime Victims Memorial at the east entrance of the Sarpy County Administration Building in Papillion. The memorial was championed by Sheriff Jeff Davis, who led the effort before his retirement. Davis, who became sheriff in 2005, said he was determined to see the project through because the pain of these victims doesn't go away. It stays. The victims need to be remembered. The memorial features a path symbolizing Danny and Christopher's journey to heaven, with words like hope, peace, and justice embedded in the walkway. Artist Joe Putgenter designed it to inspire other victims of violent crimes, showing that even in the aftermath of unspeakable tragedy, there can be healing. The memorial also raises funds for the Sarpy County Sheriff's Foundation, which provides grants to families of crime victims. Lisa Summers, who went to the same junior high as Danny Joe Eberly, worked on the memorial project as part of Leadership Sarpy. She remembers how the community changed after Danny's ending. "It was almost like COVID. Everybody was on lockdown," she told reporters in 2023. "We didn't want to go outside because we didn't know what was going to happen." That fear, that collective trauma, still echoes through the community more than 4 decades later. The case has remained in the public consciousness through various media. Author Mark Pettit, a 3-time Emmy Award-winning television news anchor who covered the case for KMTV in Omaha, wrote the book A Need to Kill, the true crime account of John Zuber, Nebraska's most notorious serial child killer. The book was first published in 1990, but Pettit has continued updating it over the years. After a lengthy legal battle, he finally obtained Zuber's death row drawings and published them in an updated edition. The drawings, which Pettit describes as sadistic depictions of stabbing and torturing children, prove that Zuber was still fantasizing about committing more violent crimes right up until his execution. Pettit's book has become a true crime classic and was a finalist for the USA Best Book Awards in true nonfiction. His work also includes handwritten letters Zuber wrote from prison, providing chilling insights into the mind of someone who admitted he would have continued ending children if given the chance. In 2024, the Netflix series Mastermind: To Think Like a Killer featured the Zuber case in an episode with legendary FBI profiler Dr. Ann Burgess, who worked closely with Robert Ressler on developing criminal profiling techniques. The series examines how Zuber's domestic abuse background and his own childhood trauma contributed to his development into a serial predator. The case remains a landmark in forensic psychology and criminal profiling. It's taught in universities and law enforcement academies as an example of how behavioral analysis, forensic evidence, and witness testimony can work together to catch someone who believes he's too smart to get caught. The unique rope evidence, the bite mark analysis, and the psychological profile all came together to solve what seemed like an impossible case. As for the victims' families, they've had to live with the knowledge that their sons were taken by someone who was supposed to be a role model for children. Someone wearing a Boy Scout uniform. Someone who earned merit badges and taught wilderness survival. The betrayal of that trust makes the tragedy even more painful. The community's response, however, demonstrates the resilience of the human spirit. Rather than letting fear win, Bellevue and Papillion chose to remember, to honor, and to fight for other crime victims. The memorial ensures that Danny Joe Eberly and Christopher Walden are more than just statistics, more than just names in a true crime story. They were real children with families who loved them, futures that were stolen, and lives that mattered. The John Zuber case stands as one of the most disturbing examples of how evil can hide behind trusted faces. An Eagle Scout, an honor student, an Air Force airman, someone parents trusted with their children. But beneath that exterior lurked something monstrous. Someone who at 13 stabbed girls with pencils and razor blades for sexual gratification. Someone whose fantasies consumed him to the point where he couldn't control his urges. What makes Zuber particularly terrifying is his self-awareness. When asked if he would do it again, he admitted the urges were too strong. Yet he continued to put himself in positions with access to vulnerable victims. He joined Boy Scouts. He mentored young boys. He positioned himself exactly where predators position themselves. The case highlights the power of forensic science and criminal profiling. Ressler's profile was remarkably accurate. The unique rope became the smoking gun. The bite mark analysis provided crucial links despite Zuber's attempts to destroy evidence. Barbara Weaver's quick thinking, writing down that license plate even as a predator approached her, likely saved countless lives. Zuber admitted he couldn't stop. He would have continued. For 116 days, Bellevue lived under a predator's shadow. Parents were terrified. Kids couldn't walk to school alone. Paper routes became death traps. Trust was shattered. But perhaps most haunting is how Zuber spent his final years, drawing pictures of himself torturing children, writing letters describing fantasies, never showing genuine remorse. His drawings confirmed what investigators always suspected: he would have ended again. Today, the memorial to Danny Joe Eberly and Christopher Walden stands in Sarpy County. The path represents their journey to heaven and a community's refusal to let fear win. A determination to remember not just how these boys passed away, but how they lived. The case serves as a permanent reminder that monsters don't always look like monsters. Sometimes they wear Boy Scout uniforms. Sometimes they have high IQs and serve in the military. The evil isn't written on their faces. John Zuber's case changed how law enforcement approaches serial predators. It demonstrated the importance of linking cases across state lines. It showed how behavioral profiling could narrow suspects. It proved that even someone who studies investigation techniques can be caught through detective work and forensic science. The legacy of John Zuber is written in the sorrow of 3 families, the fear that gripped communities, and the memorial where words like hope and justice remind us that humanity can choose to remember and protect. 3 young boys had their futures stolen by someone who wore the uniform of trust. Their memory lives on in every child who walks safely to school, every paper route completed without incident, every evening jog that ends with a return home.